Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson. I am so excited. Amor Towles, the author of The Rule of Civilities, which was a New York Times bestseller, is here with his new novel, A Gentleman in Moscow, my favorite book of the year. Amor, it's so great to have you here.
It's great to be here.
When we heard that you were coming here at early November, I think I let out a little scream because I want to tell you this is my favorite book of the year.
Thank you.
Hands down. And I know some of our other booksellers have absolutely adored this book. So, I want to know, with A Gentleman in Moscow and knowing, your fans, your readers who absolutely adored Rules of Civility, what are you hearing from them now that the book has been out about almost 2 months now?
Yeah.
What are you hearing from those and new readers who are coming to your writing?
I'm glad to say I'm not flooded with expressions of disappointment, which should be disappointing for
right.
me.
Right.
The books are very, very different.
Yeah.
And but I think that there are aspects of the books artistically which are comparable. Mm-hmm. And so I think that readers who enjoyed Rules of Civility, even though they're transported to a very different place and a very different set of issues and a very different, in a way, style of delivery, there are commonalities that they can appreciate between the two books.
Right.
And one can build on the other in that way. I mean, sort of ironically.
Yeah. Well, they're both over a course of 20, 30 years, or Rules of Civility starts. Gotta look back.
Yeah, because as I say, and I didn't really realize this until I was almost done writing A Gentleman in Moscow. Mm-hmm. But when I finished with Rules, I was trying to decide what to write next, and I had 4 different things I was thinking about doing. I chose A Gentleman in Moscow out of 4 ideas in development and pursued it. Late in the first draft, I realized that at some level subconsciously, the reason I must have chosen that topic is that it's almost the opposite of Rules of Civility in a couple of very important structural ways. Rules of Civility, it's from the perspective of a 25-year-old woman who's from a working class background beginning to climb the social and economic ladder. Right. And Gentleman in Moscow, obviously you've got someone who's older and he's giving up his social and economic advantages and all the way down. Mm-hmm. Rules of Civility really takes place over 1 year. So you're right, there's a coda and an epilogue and a foreword where you get a sense of the future, but the vast majority of that book is January, New Year's Eve, 1938 into the end of 38. Whereas this book really spans 30 years.
30
where
years.
You get the meat of that time. And I think the another major difference is because Rules of Civility is about a 25-year-old in New York, it's almost all the characters in it are 25-year-olds in New York, which is still the way 25-year-olds act in New York. They don't call home very often and they don't babysit. So there's no children or parents in Rules. But in Gentleman in Moscow, it's very much a book about generational relationships. So you have these very sharp contrasts.
Sure.
But as I say, I think that you have a sense of place in the two books. The sense of dialogue, or the style of dialogue is I think, similar. There's sort of a mix of poetic writing and some philosophical writing, some allusions, and people will find that overlapping between the two.
Yeah, right. Those are the similarities.
Yeah.
So where did the seeds start to germinate for this story? I've heard the story, but tell us where they began, because we all want to know where you got the beginnings.
Right. I've written since I was a kid, and wrote in high school and college and graduate school, but I was also in the investment business for 20 years. And in my capacity as an investment professional, I traveled a good deal, and I would spend a week at any given year in a hotel in Chicago, one in San Francisco, one in London. And I was arriving at my hotel in Geneva for the 8th year in a row. And as I was walking in, I recognized people in the lobby from the year before, as if they'd never left. And on my way upstairs, I thought, it's a nice hotel, but can you imagine if you actually had to live in it?
Yeah.
And then I thought, that's kind of an interesting notion for a book. What if you had a character who was trapped in a hotel, and people come and go, and the world sort of comes through the revolving doors and goes out again, and that got me thinking. And upstairs, I took out a piece of the hotel stationery and I sketched out the scaffolding for this book. It came out of that sort of notion on that night.
So, Count Alexander Ilyich Rostov.
Yes.
So where did he come from? Where is his DNA? Because what a character! What a character! Oh my gosh!
He's an invention.
Yeah.
So he's an invention of mine. He's not based on anybody. He's certainly not based on me. My wife might wish he was, or wish I was, but so he's an invention.
Yeah.
But he is. He's obviously, I think, sympathetic with some of the characters of 19th century Russian literature, and he comes out of that world. He's an appreciator of that era. He's born at the end of that era, raised in the values of that era, and so to some degree he's an embodiment of sort of the courtly Russian gentleman that might appear in the pages of Tolstoy.
Yeah, right. So it's 1922 when the book begins, and he's been accused of writing counter-revolutionary poetry.
Right. Yeah.
And so instead of what would have happened to some people, they would have been either sent to Siberia or whatever, or they would have been put in front of a firing squad.
Right.
So instead, he is staying at the Hotel Metropol in Moscow, but now he's been given a sort of house arrest.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Which I found the beginning of this so incredibly wonderful, but also the poetry. The poem that he's actually been accused of is actually a favorite of many people.
Well, and that's the reason that he is spared is because that poem, in the context of the story, which was written in the earlier in the 1900s, was kind of a call to revolutionary action. And so he has some fans in the party for that reason, because the poem was admired by the revolutionary generation before the revolution really gets underway. But they still see that he's an unrepentant aristocrat. So in a way, the poem saves his life because they are fans, but because he's an unrepentant aristocrat, they also want to constrain his movements. And you end up with this crazy compromise of sort of permanent house arrest in his hotel.
Right. Yeah. So I know he's staying in suite, 317? Was it 317?
That's right.
Now, this hotel is really a main character in this book. And you must have spent a lot of time in this hotel, because I felt by the end of the book I could find my way through the hotel, even in the rooms where you needed the key to get into.
I appreciate your saying that. To be honest, I think the reason that you or other readers feel that way is because I spent no time in the hotel until I had almost finished the first draft.
Oh, okay.
So I had seen the hotel. I had passed through it many years before writing the book. But then when I set out to write the book, I really decided I would go back and spend a week living at the hotel, but only when the first draft was done.
Oh, okay.
And I do that. I defer that because I don't want the reality of the hotel to get in the way of how I imagine it.
Right.
And I think that it seems a little counterintuitive for many readers, but in a work of the imagination, I think that they tend to hold together best and seem most alive to the reader when they are wholly a part of that imaginative invention and not cobbled together from sort of instincts and ideas and facts.
So did you change anything in the story about the hotel after?
I changed almost nothing. Because the hotel lived up to most of my expectations. Okay. So it is a little different. But in the end, actually, at the end of the process, I went back and studied the history of the hotel more closely. Mm-hmm. And you can see some of the first-hand accounts of life in the hotel at amortowles.com. I mean, if you want to go and look at it. And that was fun because at the end of the process, I went and began researching first-hand accounts. I was a little worried that they would not be as sort of bright and interesting and alive and historical as my own inventions. And they ended up being much more crazy and fun. So,
Yeah.
so
Well,
yes,
I'm glad we didn't change anything.
Yes,
You didn't
right.
do anything.
Exactly,
So
right.
that's great.
Yeah.
So research. Did you have to do a lot of research about the just post-revolution, even knowing the life of this 30-year-old count and the aristocracy he was from, knowing what happened pre-revolution? Did you do a lot of research on the time period?
I don't tend to do research-driven projects.
Okay.
What I tend to do is I try to write from my own fascinations.
Okay.
So in the case of Rules of Civility, I was already a fan of the 1920s and 30s. Over 2 decades, I had read the novels, watched the movies, listened to the music, studied the paintings, and that long-standing fascination was the foundation that I used to then invent Rules of Civility. It's the same thing here in A Gentleman in Moscow. I'm a long, decades past fan of Russian culture, starting with the great 19th century novels, but then into the sort of the avant-gardism of the early 20th century in Russia, and then the political activity and the history. So I once again use that as a foundation to invent my story. And when I was done, I went back and did some more tactical research to refine elements. But it's just like we were talking about in terms of the hotel. To bring a period to life, I think it's so important as an artist to have fully digested your own interests in that era, and to use that as your platform rather than to go out and, again, sort of try to build a machine out of parts that you've gathered from history books or newspaper accounts, which I think most readers can tell that reads differently.
Yeah, but the book is told from a third person, so this narrative and the footnotes within the book were fabulous.
Yes, thanks.
Because we see the Count and he's living in this world, but yet this eternal optimist that he is, and he takes a hard situation because he's moved from this luxury suite up to the attic to a small room.
Right.
And but you see this going on, but then the footnotes kind of tell you, he's in this inner world of the hotel, but the footnotes give you more information about what may be happening outside.
And Becky, you're absolutely right, and that is one of the most challenging aspects of writing the book for me, was to strike a balance between his positive viewpoint within the confines of the hotel, but then to do justice to some degree to what was going on outside the hotel, which were obviously very turbulent times for the country and for the citizenry of Russia. And so there is this other voice. While 90% of the book is told from his perspective, this other voice begins to intrude with sort of insight into what's going outside, and it's a little bit more critical a voice. It's more cynical and a little more cutting. We get a sense it's a person who is living outside the hotel and has firsthand experience with how difficult life in Russia was at that time. And that voice appears as footnotes initially, and then starts to show up as addendums to chapters where you learn what's going on, and then ultimately shows up as the introduction to 1930, 1938, 1946, kind of telling you historically what's been happening in the 8 years you've just missed, what have you. And so yes, you have this balance between those two voices to achieve the combination of his dedicated viewpoint and sort of the reality of the times.
And I love the footnotes. I read, there's other novels where
they can be very annoying. I know.
They can be
so you
annoying.
have to be very
This was
careful
so
about them.
not annoying.
Okay,
It was really great. I love the other characters. They were so fully formed, and like Andre and Emil and Anna but Anna Urbanova, the famous actress.
Yes.
And the scene where she invites him to her room.
Yeah.
And her dress drops. But after, he's ready to leave later in the night, and he goes out quietly, he picks up her blouse off the floor, and he lays it over a chair.
Yeah.
And she's not quite asleep, but she is so annoyed.
Yeah, she's...
And I love that fact. And what happens, and I love that fact where she eventually just throws all her clothes out the window.
Well, yeah, so she, initially she kind of sort of is pleased that he would be picking up after her, but then it starts to annoy her because she sees it as him putting on airs in essence, sort of suggesting that he's somehow better, superior to her, and so to sort of punish the world, she refuses to pick up her clothes for weeks, and eventually she's prodded by her maid, and in a fit of fury she throws the clothes out the window, and then in the middle of the night, having been kind of put in her place, she quietly goes out and sort of gathers them back. And this is a case where, one of the few cases in the book where that is from history, but it's not from Russian history, it's from Towles family history. Because,
your family.
Because when my parents were first married, my mother was not very good at picking up her clothes, and they did sort of pile up, and my father did throw them out the window. And in the middle of the night, one of them did go back out and gather the clothes and bring them back in the apartment. But I will let you decide which of the two parents.
Okay.
I will not.
So that's family lore.
That's
for
family
you.
lore.
That's fantastic. Right. But the characters in this book were absolutely wonderful, and the friendships he creates, and the support. And you had your evil characters in this too.
Right.
But I love the way even the maitre d' and the head chef in the hotel, and this triumvirate that they create, and even the Count asking to become a waiter in the hotel, and his expertise only lends to things, and giving him the opportunity to make the seating arrangements for some of the parties, and knowing that he knows how to do this, but to do it in the right finessing way.
Yeah, I mean, the notion of him becoming a waiter was it's one of those notions that I had on the first day in when I was outlining for the book on the first night, because it struck me as sort of this ideal irony that at that time the perfect waiter would have been a person from the nobility, because they were the ones who had been raised with a knowledge in cuisine and wine and foreign languages and etiquette. And so yes, you get this sort of notion that the busted aristocrat, was forced, taking this humble role, but yet he's the master at it. And so, that becomes obviously a central part of the story.
But all of his loves, whether it's literature or music or anything, are just so beautiful in this book. But I did love the scene where the three of them are going to make bouillabaisse.
Yes, right.
And just coming across, trying to get the ingredients, because so many things go into that recipe. That was wonderful to see the three of them doing that.
Well, I think that you're nice to kind of pinpoint the friendships. I think that more broadly, one of the strengths of the novel as an art form is that it can effectively relay to us the quality of relationships. And paintings don't do that in quite the same way. Music cannot do that in quite the same way. But in even a short story can't do it in quite the same way. But in a novel, we can really see how people interact. And when it's done well, they seem like three-dimensional individuals, and we get to see them under different circumstances over time, and that can feel very real. So I want to take advantage of that as a strength of the novel, to make sure that there are these three-dimensional relationships that we can appreciate.
And it's over a 30-year period that we get to see these relationships.
Yes.
And then Nina, the young girl who comes into his life, and I know these comparisons made. She's sort of like the Eloise of the Metropol, but more like she's just like Eloise in the Plaza Hotel. But what a friendship they create, and we don't want to give too many spoilers away.
Well, I know
because I don't want to say too much.
We've already been doing that, but hopefully this will be watched by people who've read the book.
Yeah. Right. But I thought that was just wonderful how he creates and sort of takes her under her wing, because she needs someone like that in her life. Yep. But also how she's quite mischievous in what she does.
Yes, right.
Yeah. So tell it, your love of Russian literature and some history. Where did that start? Was it in high school, or was it when you were?
I did read Crime and Punishment for the first time when I was a senior in high school. But I think my appreciation for Russian literature really came later. I mean, probably in my mid-20s, where I was more bowled over by what I was reading. I remember reading, living in the East Village and beginning War and Peace, and rushing home from my job. Refusing to go out with friends for drinks or whatever, because I wanted to make progress in the book. It was so exciting for me to read, and it remains one of my favorite novels. And that kind of began the process of exploring the 19th century Russian novels more thoroughly. We have, as a generation, have been given a gift in that Previer and Volkansky, the husband and wife translating team, have been slowly but steadily translating all of the great works of Russian literature. I think they've now done at least 15 translations. I've read 6 of their Dostoevskys. I've read, War and Peace and Anna Karenina by them. Their Gogol, their Master and Margarita, their Chekhov, and they are terrific. And so it is, for anyone who remembers an interest in Russian literature, it is worth going back and plowing through it because of
these new translations.
Because of the new translations. And particularly, as I got to say, having gone back and reread those books recently in the last 5 years, I had no appreciation for how good Dostoevsky was when I was a teenager. Crime and Punishment, I remember as being much more burdensome a read than it
Sure.
is now. It's
That's right.
it's funny, it's exciting, it's thrilling. So it's fun to go back as an adult and revisit those books.
Yeah, it really is. So, talking about Chekhov and, another, is it Mishka?
Yes.
Mindich, who is, basically he and Alexander knew each other then when they were young.
Yeah.
And
School friends.
School friends. And he's also a poet and an idealist.
Yes,
and I
that's right.
love the whole fact, and I don't want to give too much away here again.
You are. You better not delve.
Well, but also just the whole thing about talking about bread. And
Yeah,
I love
yeah.
that part, and then we
Yes.
won't give it away what happens at the end. But what an incredible friendship, and I love that part of the book too.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
And he was a very important character for
Yeah,
me because I wanted somebody who would embrace the revolution, would be from the Count's background, but would embrace the revolution, and also then would have to go through the cycle of disappointment that many of the idealists experienced, or almost all of the idealists experienced under the Stalinist era.
There's one scene, it's earlier in the book, where the Count talks about the three things that he thinks are the greatest contribution of Russian culture or to the West.
Yeah.
But, in another part of it, talking about, when you think about Russia, one of the things that they've contributed to the world is destruction.
Well, that's what Mishka says
That's
in,
what
sort of
Mishka
in a
says.
low moment. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So tell us those three things besides
Well,
the
yeah,
Nutcracker.
he points to Chekhov and Tolstoy as being sort of that no one will replace Chekhov as the perfect writer of the short form, and no one will replace Tolstoy as the perfect writer of the long form. And kind of all writers are somewhere in between the two. And he talks about obviously the Nutcracker and what a gift that's been to kind of all of our imaginations of Christmas. He talks about caviar, as a food and presentation. But Mishka, later talks about this notion that that he has that the Russians are particularly adept at destroying what they've made.
Yeah.
And he refers to a number of examples, and there are plenty in Russian history, but certainly the most famous and the most incredible is that when Napoleon seized Moscow, seized the capital, had installed himself in the Kremlin on his first night, went to bed, now the ruler of Russia, that he was woken up at 2 or 3 in the morning and to be informed that the citizens of Moscow had set the city on fire themselves, rather than let him have it, and which drove him out of the city and back towards his ruin. And what an incredible thing to have done. I love Paris. I love the French. They never would have done that.
Right.
Their love of Paris is such that they wouldn't have destroyed Paris rather than let Hitler take it. For instance, they did not. In fact, they in a way to protect Paris, they let him in the gates. So there's something very unusually fierce and proud and patriotic in the Russian spirit, which can express itself in this way, this willingness to destroy their own works. And that became an aspect of the communist era, where they tore down their most prized churches. They imprisoned some of their greatest poets. They were willing to do things that that were very hard.
Yeah. Well, one of the great parts of the book, in here, I got to be careful, a 5-year-old girl, and we're not going to say anymore, comes into his life.
Yes.
And how that changes for him,
Yeah.
how it changes his attitude towards his situation,
Right.
and what he sees, what he can do for this girl, even though she is in his charge, and he's in this small world.
Sure.
And I love the fact that what happens with her and the music that's brought into the story, which is absolutely fabulous. And but this relationship is so special, and we don't want to give away too much because there is connection with it.
Because no one's going to need to read the book.
But that was absolutely fabulous,
Thank you.
and to see that growth, and to see the other characters within the whole embrace this little girl.
Yeah. Thank you.
It was so great. So, I kept thinking when I was reading this book about the word gentleman. and the definition of it. And
Yeah.
if you look it up, chivalrous, courteous, honorable. But then adding for Count Alexander Rostov, think about, he's generous, he's kind, he's cultured, he's gracious,
Yeah.
which is, but I don't think that calling someone a gentleman is old-fashioned. I think it's one of the highest compliments you can give to a man.
Right.
Or another person, whether you want to call them a mensch or whatever.
Right.
But I find that the title of this book really says it all about this man.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you saying that. It was the title was chosen late.
Yeah. Okay.
I like it too. I mean, I love the title. I think it's the perfect description.
Yeah.
But certainly central to the book is, it's not the only theme by any means, but central to it is the fact that the Count is standing with one foot in the 19th century,
Right.
coming from a background which is very privileged, but where gentlemanly behavior was fostered.
Right.
And that wasn't simply a form of being polite in society. It had elements of integrity associated
Right.
with it as well. And here is, on the other side, he's got a foot now in the 20th century where the Bolsheviks were changing Russia radically across the board. And it's important for us as Americans to remember that at the outset of that experiment, which in many ways became a failed experiment, of course, but at the outset of the experiments, they had ideals that we would see as virtuous.
Right,
They wanted immediate, and they gave immediate equality to women. They had a country with 95% illiteracy, and after the Bolsheviks took over, 20 years later, they had 95% literacy. I mean, they required 30, 40, 50, 60-year-olds to go back to school and learn how to read. And so, and they wanted to industrialize. Russia was way behind the rest of Europe and the United States. It was still plowing with, wooden plows and oxen, and in a time where, we had tractors in the United States. So the Bolsheviks did push this. So there was this trade-off. We're going to abandon this 19th century sensibility, which also was tied to unfair privilege. And we're going to replace it with this dynamic, forward-acting, mission of modernization with, ideally, is going to end up with equality.
Right.
Now, they failed.
They failed
in the
right.
equality
Yeah.
effort. But yes, that's the Count has a foot in both of those
Right,
worlds, and
right.
that's to some degree what the book is about, is how we manage that.
Yeah, but a lot of the aspects of being the kind of person he was never goes out of style. It's
Well,
all-
yeah, I
and
like to
he's-
think that.
Well, and also too, the word classy comes to mind and all that. But he was, with the, like you say, the 2 feet. 1 foot in one world and
Well,
1 foot in the
I'm
future.
very much a believer that the progress of humanity is not linear. It tends to be, when we are making gains in culture or society or industry, we are always making trade-offs. We are sacrificing something in order to achieve that new advantage. We are losing something, and we see that in our time today. We have the benefit of the internet and cellular phones with this incredible ability to communicate and to have information at our fingertips, but that has brought all kinds of perils with it too, and has brought has created a lack of certain kinds of interaction that for hundreds of years, human beings relied on a daily basis as the foundation for the way a community was built or a family was built. So every decade you see that. There's advances that come at great cost, and as individuals, there's always a bittersweet aspect to that.
Yeah, right. So, what are you working on now, and what can we look forward to?
You
don't have to say.
I'm
keep it under wraps.
Viking has very nicely contracted to publish my next 2 novels. I have to write them now, and so. But yes, I tend to keep that pretty close to the vest.
Okay. So I want to know what is your earliest recollection of wanting to be a writer? And do you remember that first thing as a
first
child
grade.
that you wrote and you brought it home? Look what I did.
It's first grade.
Yeah.
And it's in essence all I ever wanted to do in many ways.
Yeah. So, Amor, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having
And
me.
thank you for coming to see us. We've been thrilled that you're coming, and we love hand-selling this book and putting it in the reader's hands.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone enjoys it.
Great conversation. If you love great characters, if you love history, if you love literature and music and food, you're going to absolutely love A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. Read it. It was my favorite this year. Thanks for joining me on Authors Revealed.